Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. All right, let's talk about something that most people sense is happening, but very few are saying out loud. On the surface, it looked like just another tense interview. You had former Arkansas governor and longtime evangelical conservative Mike Huckabee sitting across from media heavyweight Tucker Carlson, and the topic drifted, as it often does these days, toward Israel. At some point, the conversation touched on the biblical idea of the promised land, the land described in Genesis as stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. That's ancient scripture language, but in modern geopolitics, that's dynamite. What followed wasn't just an awkward exchange, it was a window into something much bigger, a quiet civil war inside the American right over Israel, over foreign policy, theology, national identity, and even the future direction of conservatism itself. And here's the key point. This isn't ultimately about Israel. It's about what American conservatism wants to be. For decades, support for Israel was one of the least controversial positions in Republican politics. It was almost automatic. You could disagree on taxes, immigration, trade, even the role of government. But on Israel, the party was unified. Strong support. Full stop. But over the last 10 years, that unity has started to fracture. To understand why, we need to step back and talk about something most political analysis avoids: theology, because you cannot understand the American right's relationship with Israel without understanding evangelical Christianity. A huge portion of the Republican base is evangelical Protestant, and within evangelical theology, especially in its dispensationalist form, Israel is not just another country. It plays a central role in biblical prophecy, the covenant with Abraham, the land promises in Genesis, the restoration of Israel in 1948. Many evangelicals see these not just as historical or political events, but as part of a divine timeline. For them, support for Israel isn't primarily strategic. It's spiritual, it's moral, it's theological. Mike Huckabee comes out of that tradition. So does former Vice President Mike Pence. So do millions of voters in places like Texas, Oklahoma, and the Deep South. When they talk about Israel, they're not just talking about a Middle Eastern ally. They're talking about Scripture, covenant, and faithfulness to God's promises. Now contrast that with another strain of thought rising inside the Republican Party, the America First movement. This movement, which gained momentum under President Donald Trump, is far more skeptical of foreign entanglements. It questions why the United States should be involved in endless wars overseas. It asks whether American taxpayers should subsidize foreign governments while domestic infrastructure decays. It is suspicious of globalism, skeptical of interventionism, and laser-focused on national sovereignty. Within that worldview, Israel is not a theological imperative. It's a strategic question. Does supporting Israel serve American interests? If yes, fine. If not, reassess. That's a very different lens. Tucker Carlson has increasingly voiced that perspective. He has openly questioned us involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts. He has challenged the idea that support for Israel should be automatic or unquestioned. He has framed foreign policy through the lens of American costs and American priorities. And here's where the tension emerges. On one side, you have evangelicals who see Israel as part of a sacred narrative. On the other side, you have America First populists who see foreign policy as a cold calculation of national interest. Both groups are part of the modern conservative coalition. Both helped elect Trump. Both consider themselves patriotic, but they do not see Israel the same way. That's not a small difference. That's a philosophical fault line. Historically, the Republican Party was dominated by what we might call interventionist conservatism. Think back to the post-World War II era. Think of the Cold War. The GOP was strongly anti-communist, pro-military, and willing to project American power abroad. Support for Israel fit neatly into that framework. A democratic ally in a volatile region, aligned against hostile regimes. Figures like Ronald Reagan embodied that approach. Strong defense, moral clarity, global engagement. But the Iraq War changed everything. After years of war, trillions of dollars spent, and thousands of American lives lost, a growing segment of conservatives began to question the interventionist model. Why were we rebuilding other countries while our own borders were porous? Why were we fighting endless wars with unclear objectives? Why did every foreign crisis seem to demand American involvement? Out of that frustration grew the America First instinct. It wasn't isolationism in the 1930s sense. It was more selective engagement. It was about redefining priorities. And Israel, inevitably, became part of that debate. Now, to be clear, even the America First wing is not anti-Israel in the conventional sense, but it is less emotionally attached. It is more transactional. It is willing to ask uncomfortable questions. That shift has created friction with the evangelical base, which still views Israel through a covenantal lens. President Trump himself has had to navigate this divide. On the one hand, his administration made some of the most pro-Israel moves in modern U.S. history. He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He moved the U.S. embassy there. He recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He brokered the Abraham Accords. Those moves thrilled evangelicals. On the other hand, Trump's broader rhetoric emphasized burden sharing, skepticism of foreign wars, and putting American interests first. That language resonated with populists who are wary of open-ended commitments abroad. So Trump became the bridge figure. He gave evangelicals symbolic and substantive wins on Israel while maintaining a broader America First narrative that appealed to the populist wing. But bridges are only stable as long as both sides feel heard. The recent tensions we're seeing, interviews, statements, online debates, suggest that the balance is getting harder to maintain. Younger conservatives, especially those active online, are less tied to the evangelical theological framework. They consume media differently. They are more influenced by nationalist and realist thinkers than by church networks. For them, the question is not, what does Genesis say? But what serves American workers? Meanwhile, older evangelical voters remain deeply committed to biblical interpretations that place Israel at the center of God's unfolding plan. They vote in high numbers. They organize. They fund campaigns. They are not going away. So the Republican coalition now contains two powerful moral languages. One speaks in terms of covenant, prophecy, and blessing. The other speaks in terms of sovereignty, borders, and national interest. Both claim to be authentically conservative. Both claim to represent America's future. And here's where it gets even more complicated. There's also a third layer, the broader geopolitical reality. The Middle East is not static. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and other regional powers are recalibrating. U.S. energy independence has changed strategic calculations. The global balance of power is shifting toward Asia. China looms large in conservative foreign policy thinking. So when America First conservatives question the scale or form of U.S. involvement in the Middle East, they often frame it not as abandonment, but as reallocation. Focus on China. Secure the Pacific, reinforce domestic industry. That strategic recalibration can collide with evangelical urgency about Israel's security in a volatile region. It's not that one side cares about Israel and the other doesn't. It's that they prioritize differently, for different reasons. Now, some commentators try to reduce this tension to personality clashes. Tucker versus Huckabee, media feuds, viral moments. But that misses the deeper story. This is about identity. Is the American right fundamentally a moral religious movement with geopolitical implications? Or is it a nationalist movement with pragmatic alliances? Is support for Israel a theological commitment? Or is it a strategic partnership subject to review? These are uncomfortable questions because they cut to the core of what conservatism is becoming. And this matters far beyond Israel. The same fault line appears in debates over Ukraine, over NATO, over Taiwan, over foreign aid more broadly. The evangelical interventionist wing often frames these issues in moral terms, defending democracy, standing with allies, resisting evil regimes. The America First wing often frames them in cost-benefit terms. What's the exit strategy? What's the direct American interest? You can see how this plays out in primaries, in think tanks, in media ecosystems. The Republican Party of 2004 would not recognize parts of the Republican Party of 2026. So where does Trump fit into this now? If he remains the central figure in conservative politics, he will again have to manage this coalition. He cannot afford to alienate evangelicals. They are foundational. But he also cannot ignore the populist base that sees foreign entanglements as distractions from domestic revival. Trump's political instinct has always been transactional and adaptive. He reads his base. He senses shifts. He tests boundaries. That gives him flexibility, but it also means he operates in a space of constant balancing. If tensions over Israel intensify, for example, if there's a major regional escalation, the pressure to choose sides rhetorically could grow. And if a post-Trump generation takes over, the outcome is even less certain. Will the next conservative leader come out of the evangelical tradition, keeping Israel at the center of a theological narrative? Or will the next leader emerge from the nationalist realist wing, redefining alliances strictly through the lens of American interest? That is the real long-term question, because again, this isn't about one ambassador's phrasing. It isn't about one cable news interview. It's about whether American conservatism defines itself primarily through faith-based global commitments or through nationalist strategic restraint. And the answer will shape not just U.S.-Israel relations, but the entire architecture of American foreign policy for the next generation. If the evangelical vision remains dominant, we'll likely see continued strong, even intensified, support for Israel framed in moral and biblical terms. If the America First realist vision gains ground, support may remain, but it will be more conditional, more openly debated, more tied to measurable American interests. Either way, the era of automatic consensus appears to be over. And maybe that's the most important shift of all. For decades, certain foreign policy positions were almost untouchable inside the GOP. Now they are debated openly on major platforms. That tells you something profound about how political coalitions evolve. Every major political movement eventually faces an identity crossroads. The American right is at one now. So when you see debates over Israel flare up, don't just watch the headlines. Watch the language. Watch the moral frameworks. Watch which arguments resonate with younger voters versus older ones. Because what's really being contested is not just Middle East policy. It's the soul of the conservative movement. And that's why this moment matters. Not because it signals the end of support for Israel, not because it predicts a sudden rupture in alliances, but because it reveals a deeper conversation about who conservatives believe they are, and what kind of global role they think America should play. This isn't about Israel alone. It's about what American conservatism wants to be. Thanks for watching.